Notes from Naija, because every day in Nigeria teaches me something I didn't know I needed to learn. Status. Now, there are some moments that happen so quickly that your body begins to react way before your mind even has time to understand why. Mine happened somewhere between my home and the drive to our farm. By now, that drive has become so very familiar to me because it's the same roads, it's the same roadside markets that I see on the way there. It is the same motorcycles that are weaving through the traffic, ones that seem to have mastered this controlled chaos that we see in Nigeria. The same women that are balancing the baskets on their head with this level of grace that I probably won't understand. The road, it became something that was very normal to me until traffic slowed down. And at first I couldn't really tell why it was slowing down, but then I saw them. And it wasn't these orange traffic cones that I grew up seeing in America. There were tires. There were old tires that were stretched out across the road. There were tree branches that were creating like makeshift barriers. Police officers that were standing in the middle of the highway deciding who would continue and who they would pull over. Now, if you've ever driven in America, you'll see checkpoints, and they're usually something that happened for a reason. Maybe it's Memorial Day weekend, or it's Christmas, or 4th of July. Most people in the USA, the police are trying to meet a quota, right? And you immediately think they're doing the checkpoint because, they're looking for drunk drivers. But in Nigeria, checkpoints, they are simply a part of everyday life. And although I've driven through plenty of these checkpoints in Nigeria, I've never actually been stopped. Now, that morning, I was driving to the farm with some of my husband's relatives and a few people that were coming to help us on the farm. And in front of me, it was a large cement truck. And right directly behind me, there was another construction truck. So they were carrying some material. And as we got closer to the checkpoint, I found myself quietly praying, like, God, please make me invisible to these police officers because I do not want to be stopped. And, sometimes work trucks are, waved straight through the traffic. And the cement truck that was in front of me, they were asked to just keep going. And then it was my turn. The officer glanced at me through the window. I waved, I smiled, and I'm thinking, yes, he's going to let me go through. And then he looked me directly in my eyes through that glass window. He raised one finger and he pointed over to the side of the road. And I pulled over. Now, I don't remember, turning down the music, but what I do remember is this. I remember just how quiet the car suddenly became. My hands began to tighten the wheels as I started to pull over the car. My heart started to pound because I had no idea what to expect. And everybody else that were inside of the car with me, they immediately started to coach me. They were saying, just smile, answer all the questions they have, be kind, be respectful. So as I pulled over, I rolled down my window, I smiled, and I put on an accent. I said, "Good morning, sir." And he nodded and he said, "Good morning." And then he asked me for my driver's license and the vehicle paperwork. And that was the moment that I had another wave of panic just suddenly hit me because I don't have a Nigerian driver's license. I still have my American ID and driver's license. So I slowly reached into my purse. I pulled out my wallet, handed him my ID, and he looked at it. He looked at me. He looked back at my ID, and it felt like forever. And while he was standing there, my mind had already finished writing the story. My mind was already saying, oh my gosh, he can tell that I'm an American. He's going to ask me for money. This is not going to end well. And finally, he asked me for the papers for the vehicle. Now, thankfully, my family had already shown me exactly where the documents were. They were all in the glove compartment. So I handed over all of the paperwork to the officer, and he walked away. Now, from my mirror, I'm watching him and he's speaking to another officer. They're slowly flipping through the paperwork page by page. And every moment I'm just sweating. I don't know what's going to happen. But a few moments later, the female officer walked over. She smiled And she told me, "Well done. You're a good citizen." And then she said something I wasn't expecting. She said, "Show me your first aid kit." And I laughed because I'm like, "A first aid kit?" Now, before I could even process what she was asking me, she continued to say, "Then show me your fire extinguisher, show me your spare tire, show me your first aid kit." And now all of a sudden, I wasn't nervous because it was something wrong, because there was nothing wrong at this point. I was more nervous at this point because I had no idea where any of these things were, or if we even had them in the car. And then she asked me to open the booth, which is the trunk. So I was like, okay. I got out of the car. I walked to the back. I opened up the booth and I opened up the little compartment. And thank you, God. I thank God that my family believes in being prepared, because every single thing that they were asking for was right there. The first aid kit, the fire extinguisher, the spare tire, everything they needed was there. And honestly, in that moment, I remember thinking, that's actually pretty smart to have these things in the car. That's actually a good idea to have this required. Everybody should probably have these things. And for the first time since being stopped, I felt myself begin to relax because everything was there. Everything checked out, all the paperwork, even my ID. Then she looked back down at the paperwork. She paused. She looked at me, looked down, looked at me again, and she said, "You have everything except for one paper." And I told her, "I don't know what you mean. I've given you all the paperwork that belonged to the vehicle." And she smiled and she shook her head no. She said, "One paper is still missing, and it's 15,000 naira." Now, when she said that, that small bit of piece that I had, it quickly disappeared. I calmly pointed to all the documents that are in her hand. And one by one, I asked her, I said, "This one?" "Yes." I said, "Is this one good?" She says, "Yes." And she still insisted that there was another piece of paper that I was missing. Then she said to the other officer, she said, "Look," they looked at each other. They didn't say anything. They just it was just this look on their face. And together they said, they pointed back to the vehicle and told me to go sit down. So I did. I went to sit. And this time I got into the car and everybody that I was with, they were silent. Everybody was just sitting there and waiting. A few moments later, the male officer came back and he handed me my paperwork. He handed me my driver's license and he asked, "How long has it been since I've been in Nigeria?" And I told him. He said, "It's been more than 3 months and you need to have a Nigerian driver's license." So in my mind, I'm like, okay, that's fine. I can, make time to get a Nigerian driver's license. And at this point, I'm like, great. He's going to give me a warning and we're done and I'm going to be on my way. But then he looked back down at my license. He noticed my last name and he asked where I lived. I told him the area and yes, I'm here. I moved here. And then he was quiet. He looked to his left. Then he looked to his right. And then he took his arm and he placed it on top of the roof of the car. And he slowly leaned into the window and looked me directly into my eyes and quietly said, "Show me love." Now, I knew exactly what this man meant by "show me love," but I pretended I didn't. And I quietly said, "I'm sorry." And he smiled and he said, "Show me love. What do you have for me? Give me small, small." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Give me something. What do you have for me? Just small. Give me small." He kept repeating it. Now I looked around the car and I'm looking for something to give this man, and I have no idea what it is that I can give to him. And I look over and I see a bottle of water. I pick up the bottle of the water and I said, "Sir, look, honestly, this is honestly all I have, and I'm so happy to give this to you. The weather is hot. You are doing the Lord's work. Please take this water and hydrate yourself." Now he laughed. He actually laughed really hard when I said that. But I was so serious. I don't have anything to give this man. He looked away, shook his head, and said, "No. What do you mean you don't have anything for me?" And for the next several minutes, that conversation went in circles, back and forth, back and forth. He asked, I declined. He smile, I smile. He ask again, and I decline. Back and forth for like 10 minutes. Now, finally, I said to him, I said, sir, look, you've checked my driver's license. You've checked my paperwork. You've checked my registration. You've checked everything in this car, from the fire extinguisher, the first aid kit, the spare tire. Everything that you have checked has been completed. So, what exactly are you asking me to pay for? Because I'm not obligated to give you money. And honestly, my husband serves in the military, and I'm sure he would not appreciate knowing that after you've confirmed that everything is in order, I'm still being asked for money. Now, if there's something else that you need to inspect, tell me. But if everything else is complete, what exactly do you still need from me? He didn't answer me. Instead, he looked away, his head, and he smirked and he walked off. And for a few moments, I sat in the car waiting for more than 10 minutes. And then finally, another officer came over and he asked me the same questions. He looked through the same paperwork. He asked for my same driver's license. He noticed my last name, and it was the same process over and over, asking where I live, the fire extinguisher, the first aid kit, everything. And then suddenly he handed everything back to me. He looked over at the other officer and said, she's fine. Let her go. And that was it. And as I drove away, I couldn't help but to continue to replay that entire interaction in my mind. Because if I'm honest, I was frustrated. I was angry, like to my core. Not because I had been stopped, because I understand the purpose of a checkpoint. And not because they were asking me for my license and registration and all the things, the fire extinguisher. Because if that's the process, then that's the process. What frustrated me the most was everything that they've asked for, all that had happened in between. I showed that everything was in order and everything was correct. And being repeatedly asked to show me love or give me something small or what do you have for me? It felt like the conversation had stopped being about safety and it later turned into seeing what I could do for them. And that was hard for me. Because where I come from, if law enforcement asks me for money, especially during a traffic stop, that would immediately feel wrong and illegal. And there was another thought that ran through my mind after this experience, right? The officer who told me to finally go, but after that, the conversation ended. It was just over. And I thought about that moment specifically after this entire experience because I'm thinking like, did he let me go because everything was actually in order? Or did he let me go because of my last name and the influence and the way he saw things? And honestly, the truth is, I don't know. And I don't want to pretend that I do. But the question still remains. And it also revealed something that I haven't considered in myself before. Status has a way of changing people's experience. Stay with me, because sometimes status will open doors. Sometimes status will change conversations, or sometimes it gives people the benefit of the doubt way before they earn it. And it isn't just unique to Nigeria because it happens in America too. Different systems, different cultures, the same human tendencies. But there was another truth that actually stood out to me this experience. That same checkpoint. One officer pressured me. One officer looked at the paperwork, the same facts, same checkpoint, the same uniform, but different choices. Nigeria didn't teach me that every police officer is the same. It reminded me that no group of people ever is. Character still belongs to individuals, right? Integrity still belongs to individuals. And maybe that's what I'll carry with me after this experience: to stand up for myself respectfully, to ask hard questions, to refuse to normalize what I believe is wrong, but also to resist allowing one difficult interaction to become the definition of an entire country. Because wherever people exist, so does power, so does status, integrity, and temptation. And sometimes they're all standing at that very same checkpoint. And that's today's note from Naija.